If you watched my earlier video on showing versus telling, then you already know that the problem isn't telling. The problem is unintentional telling, and sometimes it's too much showing. Here's what I see happen when I work with clients. A writer internalizes show, don't tell. They go back into revision. They start cutting. They cut reflection, they cut summary, they cut interpretive lines, and suddenly the voice weakens, the pacing is dragging, the emotional clarity is blurring. And it's not because they added telling, it's because they removed it. They removed the orientation that telling provides. Today, I want to show you very concretely how contemporary novels use telling on purpose, not accidentally, not lazily, but very, very intentionally. Hi, I'm Melissa. This is Bourbon and Books. Thank you for being here. Remember to like and subscribe to this channel. I really appreciate you being here. It takes a village, and we are that village. Okay, in the first video on this topic, we reframed the debate. Readers don't disengage because they encounter telling. They disengage when they lose orientation, right? When they're not sure of where they are or what kind of story they're reading or why does this moment matter right now. Showing immerses, yes, and that is so important, but telling orients. And strong novels move between these two modes really deliberately. I want to look at some examples to show you how that really plays out. Okay, let's start with The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I read The Starless Sea for my book club last year, and it was an incredible novel. It was very different, and I really liked it. What made it so different, I think, in part, is Erin Morgenstern's use of telling to compress ideas and to orient the reader and to move us along. In the opening, there is a philosophical telling. The novel opens with a declarative framing about stories themselves. She has lines like, "There is a pirate in the basement." Erin Morgenstern doesn't just show us a basement with all of these sensory details. Now, this is immediately followed by commentary about stories and meaning. In the fate and story commentary, which is in the early chapters where the book comments on stories and doors, there are short excerpts, things like "stories are doors." This is not dramatized. It's thematic telling. It's a technical move. She names the metaphor outright, and that clarity creates coherence in a really layered narrative. There's also naming inevitability that she uses. She directly tells us that certain events are inevitable. Instead of dramatizing surprise, for example, she signals fate. Why? Because this is mythic architecture. It is not a procedural tension that she's building. If she showed every single twist and shock, the novel would totally fracture. Plus, it would be so epically long. Telling reinforces symbolic inevitability and thematic occurrence. The orientation she uses by telling is a structural tool. A Gentleman in Moscow, another book I read for book club, which I absolutely loved. Let's look at compression and philosophy. So in my first example, the Count's governing principle, the author tells us directly that the Count believes a gentleman must master his circumstances, right? That line is interpretive. It doesn't emerge only from scene. It clarifies the Count's worldview without telling us that the reader could misread his restraint as sort of passivity, right? So it frames everything that he does from that moment on. The Count's character is framed in early chapters. So there's an excerpt. The Count was an unrepentant aristocrat. That's very telling, right? Direct telling of his identity. Tells the author names the Count's disposition instead of building it scene by scene by scene. It stabilizes the tone of the story and who the Count is, so we know right away. In the mid part of the novel, telling compresses moments. So he says, "And so the years passed." That's very telling, right? It signals, though, narrative compression. He compresses years into this reflective summary, telling us how the Count has changed over time. He doesn't dramatize every dinner, every interaction. He can't, because that would, again, make this novel crazy long and too much showing rather than helping us orient ourselves in time as time passes for the count, because we're talking about many, 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 many years, right? So telling bridges time and articulates the internal philosophy of the count. Okay, let's look at Station 11, totally different genre. In this novel, Mandel writes simple but declarative lines about what was lost. She tells us what vanished. She doesn't dramatize every death. That summary that she uses creates this emotional steadiness, a sense of emotional steadiness. We also track civilizational loss through her telling. No more internet, no more social media. This is direct telling. It's a technical move. She's summarizing what is gone instead of dramatizing each collapse. So that prevents the fatigue and the repetition of those transitional moments. We also get memory of the old world in this way. So reflective sections about airplanes, for example. Here's a short excerpt. It was always the airplanes. That's declarative. It's reflective telling. Another technical move. She's naming significance, and that anchors emotional weight. She uses reflective commentary on civilization. She steps back and tells us what objects meant: airplanes, electricity, music. This interpretive telling helps to clarify scale. If every single loss was dramatized, the reader would become numb. So she uses telling to regulate emotional overload in large-scale trauma. Now let's move on to Never Let Me Go, a classic, contemporary classic. I don't know how it was where you were. Okay, Kathy, our character, frequently opens reflections in this way. She tells us what she now understands. She's calm, but that calm telling creates a sense of dread. She has this reflective authority. So at the very beginning, in the opening chapter, she says, "My name is Kathy H." Immediate reflective telling, right? Kathy frames the narrative calmly, and that restraint is the thing that deepens the tragedy. Early on, we have an explanation of Hailsham. Here's another short excerpt. We were special. This is telling, not showing. The understatement, again, is the thing creating the dread. So there's a sense of understated realization. Kathy tells us she didn't think much of something at the time. That distance creates sorrow. If those realizations were all dramatized explosively, say, it would feel really manipulative. So telling creates emotional restraint that deepens the impact within this novel. Okay, Circe, I read after my son read it for his high school English class, and I loved it. Miller does a great job of spanning many, many years of Circe's life on her island. So she uses telling to name transformation. Circe tells us that she's changed slowly over centuries. She summarizes growth. She names evolution. If she were to show every little incremental shift, it would totally fracture the mythic tone of this novel. So let's look more specifically at her early exile chapters. There's a short excerpt that says, "I learned," and then she goes on to say what it is she learned. So Miller uses this reflective compression. It's a technical move. It's a technical strategy she uses. Centuries pass in declarative narration. Showing every moment would not be good. It would be bloating. In the middle of the novel, we have this power evolution. I was not as I had been. She's telling us about the transformation she's been through. So it's a direct telling that preserves that epic tone. Declarative self-understanding, when she directly states what she has become, helps to clarify the arc. In a mythic scale story like this, transformation sometimes has to be named because telling helps maintain the cohesion across this epic timeline. Okay, let's come back to Erin Morgenstern and the Night Circus this time. The circus arrives without warning. Right off the bat, she's telling us. It doesn't show us wagons approaching. It doesn't show us any of the elements of the circus. It simply declares arrival. It sets the tone immediately. It orients the reader to enchantment over realism. When she says the circus arrives without warning, it is a purely declarative telling. It names the significance before dramatizing it at all. Now, there are sections about the duel's inevitability. She says it is a game. This names the structure very directly, outright. She's telling us, which reinforces the inevitability and the mythic expectation, declaring emotional significance. There are moments when Morgenstern tells us what the circus means, not just what it looks like. She names its mystery, its design, its inevitability. She doesn't dramatize every emotional reaction. What she does is she names atmosphere. If she overshowed, the dreamlike tone of this novel would collapse. So by telling, she helps to shape expectation and protect that tone. Let's look at the patterns now. Notice what these novels share. They are using telling to orient, to clarify significance, to bridge time, especially in epic timeline, to protect tone, to regulate emotional intensity, and to strengthen narrative authority. They are not avoiding telling, they are using it intentionally for their purposes. That's such an important distinction. It's something so important that we need to realize we can tell with intention and we can tell for specific reasons. Let's go over those reasons again. We can use telling to orient our readers, to clarify the significance of something, to bridge time, to show the passing of time succinctly, to protect tone, to regulate emotional intensity, and to strengthen narrative authority. These are reasons to tell within your story. So think about that. Everything doesn't need to be shown. Now, there is bad telling versus good telling. Bad telling repeats what the scene has already proved. We don't want to do that. We don't want to explain something that's already been shown. Bad telling explains after emotion has already landed. It distrusts the reader's inference skills. And we don't want to disrespect the reader in that way either. We don't need to pound things into them by showing something and then telling it again. We use telling instead as a tool. Good telling is going to anchor interpretation. It's going to name philosophical stakes. It's going to control the pacing. It's going to clarify emotional weight. It's going to protect the tone. It's going to bridge time. The difference is function. What is the telling doing? It's not the amount of telling you're putting in there versus showing. It's what that telling is doing. Okay, when I revise and I'm looking at showing versus telling or just, really my pacing, I ask myself, what job is this paragraph doing? If the job is immersion, then yes, I'm going to show. If the job is orientation, then I'm going to tell. Once I know the job, I next ask myself, if I remove this bit of telling, is the reader going to lose clarity? If the answer is yes, then it's structural, right? If it's no, then it's cushioning. And that rule then becomes really useful for me to understand the purpose of the telling that I've put in there. So it's understanding the purpose of a scene and the purpose of the piece of telling that you've inserted. Telling doesn't mean lazy writing. It's an architectural choice. It's tonal. It's psychological. Sometimes the most respectful thing that you can do is tell the reader what matters so they don't have to guess at the weight of that moment, or to tell them where you are in time and place, especially when you have a lot of time passing. Strong storytelling is not about choosing sides. It's about choosing intentionally. Do I show here? Do I tell here? And understanding why. This whole thing connects to something larger, and that is how clarity builds trust with your reader, how trust builds momentum, how authority and restraint work together in scene construction. The next video takes this further and shows how those choices shape readers' engagement at the scene level, and that is the next step, so make sure that you keep watching.